The Holy Gospel of our Savior Jesus Christ according to Mark.
Glory to you, O Christ.
Jesus began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said this quite openly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, Jesus rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." Jesus called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and to forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will be ashamed when he comes in the glory of God with the holy angels." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Please be seated. A nice uplifting gospel, don't you think? I always love the second Sunday in Lent because we get that wonderful story of Abraham and Sarah. And we always see it as a miracle that they became the ancestors of a great nation. But I always thought that the miracle was that Abraham and Sarah, at the ripe old age of 99, said yes to be new parents. I think they must have lost their minds in that instance. But nonetheless, I have to begin by asking you a question. If I could hand you something that would take away all your pain, all your suffering, all the bad things in your life, would you take it? I heard a "you bet" over here before I even finished my sentence. Any other takers? I suspect that most of us, if someone came up to us and said, "I will give you something that will make your life just fine, perfect, with no problems, no issues," most of us would jump at that opportunity. Hand it to me now. I want it immediately. But we all know in reality that is not how life works, does it? We are not freed from pain or suffering or aging or all the other things that happen to us in our lives, are we? We have to endure these things. These are things that come with life. And in a sense, that's what we have in our gospel this morning. So Jesus is doing what Jesus does, traipsing around the Holy Land, telling good things about God. And suddenly he says to everybody, well, at some point I must go and be suffered and rejected by all these people, and eventually I will be killed, but don't worry, I will be raised again. And Peter, I love Peter. Peter is the most human person in all of the disciples. Peter looks at him and says, "Jesus, have you lost your mind? What do you mean you must suffer and be rejected and pushed to the side and be killed? No Messiah of mine is going to be killed. We don't kill Messiahs, we celebrate them." But the thing is, if we are really truly honest with ourselves, we are Peter. We don't want a Messiah who suffers. We don't want a Messiah who is rejected. We want a Messiah who is going to sweep in and save us. Who is with power and strength and might is going to come take us out of the places that we are, get rid of all of our pain and suffering, and save the day. We want Superman. But what we get is Clark Kent. We get a God who comes into our world in a backwater town on a night where nothing changed as a helpless baby boy. That is not the Messiah that we were looking for. We wanted strength and power. And I suspect that that is exactly where Peter is in today's gospel. Peter wanted strength and power. Peter wanted vindication. I mean, how many of us would love to have all of our enemies just miraculously disappear and for all of us to always be right? I don't know about you, but I'm always right, so. We all would love to have God come in and do that for us, wouldn't we? To justify us as we are right. Oh, well, I did the right thing. But the thing is, we get the God that we need and not the God that we want. And that is what our gospel for today reminds us. We get a God who gives us what we need most and not what we want. In sending Jesus into our world as a helpless child to go through our suffering and our pain, God gave us what we needed. Someone who has already walked the path of suffering and pain and hallowed it, so that when we walk it, we know we don't walk that journey alone. The thing is, what we as followers of Jesus have to figure out is the difference between what we want and what we actually need. I have discovered, being a parent, that most of my job is to say no. Cover your ears. Because what they want and what they need are two very different things. They want candy. I know they need vegetables. They want to play video games all day. I know they need to read and study and all that other stuff. They want to run around and bounce off of walls. I need peace and quiet. Wait, that one wasn't about me. Never mind. My point is that God says to us, these are the things that you need. Because I have been there. Now, mind you, I am not glorifying suffering or pain. I am convinced that suffering and pain is something that God would try God's best to shield us from. But it is simply a part of our human condition. And taking up our cross and following Jesus isn't somehow going out there and looking for places where we can find to suffer. It's about walking alongside each other. It is knowing that I have had suffering and pain in my life, and I can empathize with those who go through suffering and pain in their lives. There's this wonderful thing that happened back in the late 60s, early 70s called the biodome. Anybody remember those? There was this project of putting biodomes in different places in the country so that we could eventually live on the moon or Mars or someplace else. And so they created these biodomes that were self-contained. And they grew all the plant from saplings, and they created the biodome. And then they put people in the biodome. And they realized that something happened in those biodomes. That whenever someone went over and leaned against or pushed against the trees, they all fell over. And they could not figure out why those trees fell over. All the brilliant minds that were working on this project could not figure it out. And it took a theologian to figure out what had happened. You see, when trees begin to grow as saplings, nature pushes against it. The wind pushes against it. The rain pushes against it. And the tree forces its roots deeper into the ground to stand against all of those times of high winds and rains and animals crawling all over it. The plants in the biodome had none of that. They had no life of suffering or pain or loss. And that did not give them the roots to dig deep down, and so they were easily pushed over. I suspect the same is true for us. We need those moments of adversity and challenge so that when we get those moments of profound joy, they have meaning. We may not like our suffering, but our suffering gives us the opportunity, once it's done, to be able to celebrate the joys of our lives. And so following Jesus means walking alongside each other so that when I fall down, you can pick me up. That when you stumble, I can walk next to you and help you along. Taking up our cross and following simply means that during those times when our lives are difficult, when things are hard, someone else is walking that journey with us because God has been there already. Picking up our cross and following Jesus means looking for Jesus' footsteps along the ways that we are now walking because he has been there before and has always been there with us. When I was in college, these many moons ago, my mother, in her great wisdom, would send me these care packages every once in a while that usually had way too much chocolate in it. But there's no such thing as too much chocolate, so we're good. And one time, during a difficult time in college, she sent me what many of you probably know is that poem, Footprints in the Sand.
Oh, yeah.
It is cheesy, it is corny, but it is like the best thing for a college student who is going through a difficult time. It is a reminder that God carries us through the most difficult times in our lives. And I am convinced that our gospel for today is a reminder that walking the way of Jesus, taking up our cross and following, is looking for those footprints, especially during the difficult times in our lives. You see, we want a Savior to take us out of our humanity. We want a Savior to take us out of this world of pain and suffering and confusion and chaos. But that is not the Messiah that we need. We need the Messiah who will walk this journey with us, holding our hand and guiding us eventually to that place of resurrection and new life. So I end by asking the question that I began. If I could hand you something that would take away all the pain and suffering and all the things of your life, would you take it? I suspect your answer may have changed a little bit. Because there's through those experiences that we have been shaped into who we are today and shaped by God. Take up your cross, Jesus said, and follow in the way that I have walked. May we daily be able to take up that cross and look for the steps of Jesus along the way, knowing that he walks every single step with us. And to that I can say, thanks be to God.